Good afternoon, and welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions, brought to you by the Labyrinth Society and with your host, Christiana Brinton. Joining me today is Tom Shulz, a well-known multimedia artist and labyrinth designer and builder who lives in Asheville, North Carolina. If you are joining us on this GoToMeeting session, please mute your sound by clicking on the microphone icon in the upper left of the GoToMeeting control panel that will appear on your computer screen once you log in. Of course, if you call in by phone, you will not see this. You can unmute yourselves and ask questions during the Q&A session at the end of the interview. Find the GoToMeeting invitation posted on the TLS Facebook page and the Facebook global group, and normally under the website under media, but this time I didn't do that. Sorry, everybody, but the Facebook page and the global group, hopefully a lot of people found out about it. This episode is entitled The Labyrinth and Legacy of Almetto, Howey, Alexander. My guest, Tom Shulz, is the designer and builder of this labyrinth, and it's featured on a Daniel DeWitt for Empath Inc. YouTube DVD, or YouTube video, As the first known, it's featured by him as the first known Afro-centric labyrinth constructed in the USA. And this is talked about on the video. So if you want to, you can Google this or go into YouTube and find Almetto, Almetto, Howey, Alexander, Labyrinth, and this should come up. So greetings, Tom. Welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me, Christiana, and thank you for your interest in this remarkable story.
Yeah, it really, the more I read, the more I was amazed at her, and I have a million questions. It just brought up a lot of questions. So first, let's get our audience up to speed with some information about your own labyrinth path. How and why did you become interested in designing and constructing labyrinths?
Well, in a way, it's been a lifetime journey for me. I am a practicing artist, and I also have a construction and design construction background. And so I've worked with concrete as an art form for almost 40 years. One day, a member of Myers Park Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, asked me if I was interested in working with her to create a labyrinth. That's when my research started, and it just sort of kicked off my interest in labyrinths altogether.
And so, and they were interested in putting in a permanent one of some kind of stone or concrete.
Yes, they were interested in working with concrete. We finished this labyrinth in 2005, and that was the first time that I had made a labyrinth. And interestingly enough, the labyrinth design became an important part of my art making process for many years.
Well, if we didn't have to really focus on Mrs. Alexander, I would go off and ask you. So, well, that's for another podcast. So let's talk about Mrs. Alexander. Her bio on her website, which is www.almetto.org/the-labyrinth, is filled with commendation after commendation, and really she was a powerhouse. So when did she pass away, Tom? How long has it been?
June 22nd, 2017.
Oh, okay, fairly recently. Oh, okay.
Yeah, fairly recently. I believe she was 95.
So can you share with us the story of how you met?
Oh, yeah, it's a great story. I was at the opening of a labyrinth that I built for what was then Presbyterian Church in Charlotte, hospital. It's now Vidant Health. And at the end of the opening ceremony, a woman came up to me and just had this presence, even though she was very diminutive. So she was looking up at me and I was looking down at her, and she said, "I want one of these." And I said, "Excuse me, you want what?" And she said, "I want one of these. I want a labyrinth." and I want it to be unique, and I want it to be beautiful, and I want you to build it. And so I just looked at her, and I didn't know what else to say. So I said, yes, ma'am. and that's what started the whole relationship that we had around her labyrinth.
Mm. Yeah, I can understand. The picture that you sent of you and her next to each other, I can understand this little tiny diminutive woman. She was fairly along in years when you met her, and next to you, and you were a fairly big guy, and yet her presence and her energy was what called you to say yes.
Yes, yeah, there was no question. My mother trained me well to say yes, ma'am. So it was a long-standing habit. But when in that photograph that I sent you, that was me helping Almetto walk her labyrinth for the very first time. So it was a powerful, powerful experience.
So I just want to, everybody can go to the URL, the page on the internet, and look up who she was and what she accomplished in her lifetime. And it was quite extraordinary. She came from very poor background. She educated herself. She kept educating herself. She became an educator. She educated others. And she was a moving force in the local community, in her local community, and well known in her local community. So I wonder did she tell you why she wanted this labyrinth and what it meant to her?
She had a very specific story. She was visiting a cousin of hers, I believe in Arizona, Rosetta, and there was a labyrinth that Rosetta took her to, introduced her to the labyrinth, and they walked it. And according to Almetto, when she got into the center, she just had this hallelujah moment. Then flying home back to Charlotte, she saw a magazine in the pocket in front of her, and she pulled it out, and there was this big spread about a labyrinth with photographs and the story. And she took that to be a message from the heavens to forge ahead and create one of these in her community in Charlotte. So it's quite a I don't know aha story for her.
And did she say why the labyrinth, why that would resonate with the African American community in Charlotte? Why specifically that? What was it about the labyrinth that resonated with her so strongly?
Well, first of all, Almetto herself was one of the most spiritual people I ever had the good fortune to meet, and her church community is also incredibly strong and organized and in tune with the community. So she was coming from that background, and what she wanted to do was to give a new tool to her community where people could walk this labyrinth and get this feeling of peace that she always felt when she walked it. So she wanted to share that tool, that opportunity for peace with her community, believing that it would be very helpful.
And I so many things. I mean, there's so much about her life that I would love to really focus on and take apart, but we have very limited time here. So let's talk about the Mrs. Alexander's Labyrinth and the symbols it contains. So, and the names of these are all African names, and I'm afraid I'm going to mangle them if I read them. So can you do this and talk about the labyrinth itself and tell us what each symbol means and what it meant to her, and why it's incorporated in the labyrinth design?
She actually gave me a paper with these symbols on them. They are from mud cloth, and they're from Ghana, West Africa. she was not able necessarily to trace family to Ghana, but she did have an immediate connection to these symbols. So I decided to bring them into the design. Let me just say one thing, that when I make public art, when I'm working with clients, it's not so much about what I bring to the mix in terms of my own sensibility. It's about how can I help this person, this organization, by interpreting what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did with the symbols, and they're all, I mean, I'm not going to mangle the language either, but they include things that stand for sanctity, community, humility, strength, wisdom, prudence, the idea that God's presence is everywhere at all times, the ability to adapt and overcome obstacles, which I thought was an extremely powerful symbol for this community, and a symbol for unity and diversity and oneness in humanity, which was a constant theme running through the process of creating this library of symbols, I like to call it.
And so by incorporating these symbols, for instance, I'm looking at the picture you sent, and the pictures on the website, people can see. There's a ladder that crosses the center. And that's an unusual thing, because we always talk in the Labyrinth world, we talk about Leah's circle rather than Jacob's ladder. But I'll quote this from her guidelines, where one of the things was, if you encounter someone who has fallen into a hole, a hole of poverty, of despair, of pain, then get a ladder and help them out of that hole. So, and she said, we need so many ladders. So is that ladder in the center a symbol of that, of one of her guidelines?
It is, and even more. And one of the significant things about offering someone a ladder is she was clear that you don't get on your knees and try to pull that person out of the hole. You give them a ladder and let them climb out. She was always very clear that the individual can be in charge of their own lives, even if it doesn't seem possible. So yeah, she was very clear about the idea of Jacob's dream, because she referred to this labyrinth as her dream. And she saw his ladder not necessarily in a linear way, but in more of a metaphorical way, because in his dream, people were ascending and descending, which ends up being sort of a circular movement. So we built that in, and also we did pay homage to the more typical Labyrinth center by creating a cross from that ladder. And this is something too that I wanted to share about the ladder and the cross. Being a deeply devout woman, Almetto believed that the cross was a sacred symbol of her Christian faith. And we did a lot of talking about how that image can represent one thing, but also many other things. And so we were talking about how maybe the cross signifies a type of sacrifice. And that brought up all sorts of issues of race and poverty and culture. And so we wanted to use the cross to speak to that sacrifice. And we felt that by intersecting two ladders, that we were offering hope and possibilities in that symbolism.
Yeah, spiritual and celestial, material type of thing,
right,
that the cross symbolizes, right?
And we wanted to be, oh, excuse me.
Go ahead.
I said we wanted to be careful also because the labyrinth, being an ancient image, is open to all people. The location at the Y is open to all people. And we didn't want to use symbols of her Christian faith in only a singular way, because we wanted to have a multitude of readings.
you wanted the labyrinth to be open and accessible to everyone,
Correct.
no matter what background they're from or community they're from.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And so,
Even as we were acknowledging some specific communities.
yes, right. And why did you decide on this design, on the traditional, well, I guess it's 11th Circuit sharp design type, well, Roman design?
Right. I found that in today's sensibility of the labyrinth, that's sort of the go-to image. And I often get in trouble because I do feel liberties with how I make the center. And so we like to stay somewhat true to that particular depiction. And that was what she had seen, that's what she had walked on, and that's what she wanted.
And how did you actually make the labyrinth? It looks like concrete and painted, or how was this? Because there's big squares of.
Yes. I had a contractor pour a large slab. I think it was, what was that, 40 by 60 feet.
Mm.
And then I came in and did decorative scoring to create that sense of large stones.
Ah.
And then I used acid stains and polymer stains to create the imagery.
I see.
It's very exacting and unforgiving kind of work, all done on your knees.
Yeah. How long did it take you to do this?
I did that myself in, I'm going to say 8 weeks.
Mm. Well, you have a climate there in North Carolina, right? That
Yes.
is fairly forgiving. You don't have, as much, although Asheville, you do get some degree of temperature change, fluctuation, but you don't have the ground heaving that you would. So is there a foundation underneath?
Yes, everything's sort of built to code. Everything's really strong.
Mm.
And this labyrinth is in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is incredibly hot.
Yes.
So
right.
So we're actually in one of the next phases of construction. We're going to be building some shade on the labyrinth slab itself. There's a sitting area off to the side, and we're going to create some shade. One of our goals.
Well, that's it's helpful when it's out in a broad area, in an open area with a sunny area for people walking to give them a little respite from the sun. So what was the see as I talk, I have other questions. Did this actually translate into a community-based endeavor where the community that she was building this floor for was responsive to it?
Oh, yes, I would say very responsive. The board is primarily made up of members of the community and family members and friends of Almetto's, which, each dedicated to carrying on this legacy of her work. The labyrinth is located right outside of the entry to a YMCA. In fact, to the best of my understanding, it was the first labyrinth associated with the YMCA. We partnered with the Y. They've been very responsive. So you get all types of people walking in to exercise, take classes, and they walk right past the labyrinth. So when I was working on it, people were very inquisitive. People walk the labyrinth. I believe they have some yoga lessons out there on cooler mornings. And the board has created several celebrations over the past several years that bring in a lot of community interest, and we use that as a way of educating the public about the labyrinth.
And do you think that in the years since, and this was 2012 that this was dedicated, correct? or
Yes, I made it in 2011.
2011? And do you think it is fulfilled her wishes? She died in 2017, so she had 5 years, 6 years to watch the participation grow among the Washington Heights community and the larger community. And was she satisfied? Was she happy about how it was received in the community? And
Well, I know, if you watch that video that Daniel made, I think it starts out with her saying, "I'm happy."
okay,
So yes, she was very happy that her dream uh, came to fruition. And that's one thing her daughter Harriet told me, is that her mom always took on projects, and the way she succeeded with them was to create an enthusiastic community that would soldier on and make it happen. And so that's what she did in the creation of the board for making this labyrinth, and people cycle in and out of that work. But I think she would be very pleased with the ongoing effort.
and how is it being? I mean, you mentioned that the Y uses it.
Yes.
So there is secular community use as
Hmm.
well as use by her church.
Yes, there are members of the church who do walk the labyrinth. There are members of the board who stage celebrations. There might be a celebration on a full moon, for example. There have been several of those that have been organized. So it's an ongoing growth process, the labyrinth. There's no straight line to getting completely to her dream, and she was always, I think, receptive to the idea that things might spiral off, as things with labyrinths often do.
And in terms of upkeep of the labyrinth, is there a group at her church and the reason why I'm asking these questions is because other people want to know about what it takes to uh, create awareness and create
Mm-hmm.
receptivity around the one person, and it's usually one person who gets a bee in their bonnet and says, "Oh my golly, this community, my community, has to have a labyrinth. That's what we need. This would
Right.
help so much." And and then it takes something on the part of that person to engage other people in their dream,
Mm-hmm.
in their vision.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering what she put into place in terms of an organization or a group, a guild or whatever that would help facilitate upkeep of the labyrinth
Mm-hmm.
and that regular events kept happening there. Was there a separate group or one group between her church and the Y, or how did that all work out?
Well, I think one of the brilliant things that she did was to partner with the Y, because the labyrinth is on YMCA grounds, and their maintenance department helps take care of it. Now, there are church members or board members who might go over and pick up a rock or two that a kid might throw onto the labyrinth, but primarily the Y takes care of it. And that's the kind of brilliant part here.
Yeah, she was definitely a firecracker.
Oh, yeah.
She knew what she was doing. And what about maintenance of the paint and sun bleaching and all of that? Have you had to go in and redo any of the parts of it?
We're at that stage where we need to go upgrade the colors a little bit. The acid stains that I use are permanent, but if the top coat is bleached out, then it needs to be replenished to build up the color again.
Right, right.
So
And it
we're
looks
about
like
at
it's
that point.
a beige, like a wheat color and a brownish red. It's just a photo that I have here, so I don't. And then
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
blue,
Mm-hmm.
and it looks like you've actually washed the blue a little bit in this photo anyway, so
Yes,
that it's not delineated. There's like a wash of that red, brownish red that goes into the blue, sort of like you're
yes,
walking in a gravel path almost to a certain degree.
Well, actually, we part of our intent from the beginning was to create this sense of water, a sensibility of water and of earth. So we designed the path to have a quality of a river going through sort of a clay earthen landscape, so to speak. And I would like to go back to the center a little bit, because I don't know if you've been able to see that, but the center is actually a blue and white mosaic that's in and around the ladder form.
Yes.
And what we wanted to do with that was to let that be a representation. Well, it's a full moon shining on water is the idea behind that, but it was also being presented as a baptismal pool, in the sense that the center offers transitional transformation. And Almetto and I were talking, and we had this idea that the center of the labyrinth might represent Aboriginal walk, and that the center then would be like an oasis, and you would wander out and then come back in, because she sometimes thought that we all started in the center, worked our way out, and then came back to the center again, which is a real interesting take on the walk.
Yeah, so if you think in terms of fetal development and starting in the center, yeah. Yeah, so I can really see that in the picture. Definitely, it's very evocative. They're not colors that are quote unquote normally used, and yet
Right.
it's very evocative. And so what has been, did you have a book for people to write in and write comments and discuss this, or what has been the response in the community?
Well, I wish that we would have been able somehow to set that into place where we could monitor people's responses. I don't think we've really been effective in that. I lived in Charlotte at the time that I made the Labyrinth, and moved to the mountains in 2012. So I'm a little bit apart from the community more than I was when I lived there. And we just don't have an effective way to monitor and maintain those stories. So I wish we did.
You know, in some labyrinths that I've walked, they have and I'm speaking of this because you already mentioned that you are going to put in some kind of shade areas or overhangs or whatever you're going to do to shade the labyrinth a little bit. And one of those is, it's possible that I have seen where there is a small kiosk with a book that is protected, plastic. It can be clear or not, and that book is, attached or anchored to it, to a stand of some kind, and that people can write in their comments and write in, when they were there and where they're from, and because I know that in some of the other labyrinth organizations that I've been involved with, Portland, Oregon, and then this was, and the one I'm speaking about in particular was indoors. So it was much easier, obviously, to bring out a book and leave it on the table next to the labyrinth. But it was available to people, and people really I find that people really like expressing themselves after and sharing their experiences. And so if there's any way for that to happen, that's an idea that would be protected from the elements and available for people. And it could be in like a little open sleeve or something, and people could bring it out with it. A sign could show them or something or other. So you get
that's a great idea.
So you get some feedback from people about what their experiences was. Is there any information there that explains the symbology? Because this is a highly the labyrinth itself is a metaphor and it's a symbol, but what you have done by placing these symbols that were relevant to Almetto and to the African American community of Washington Heights that were relevant to their background and their ancestry um, is unique. You know, it's not something that you see anywhere else. And it would be a shame to not have something available. So, are there brochures for people to take? Or
We do have brochures, but actually, it's interesting because when you contacted me, I realized that it was finally time to start formalizing all of this. So I've taken this as an opportunity in preparation for our talk today to start formalizing the explanation of the symbols that are built in. And one of our next goals as a board is to create some kind of short manuscript with all of this imagery involved and explained.
yeah, that I think that would be wonderful to have, so people could. Because it's been the more, and you don't want to get into your head when you're walking the labyrinth, but when you're sitting there next to it, or when you're about to walk on, and you have information about, and it's a unique labyrinth. I mean, it's not a typical design. So you know that there's other stuff when you come into this labyrinth outside of YMCA, no less. You know that it's unique. You know that it's different, and it's a natural thing for humans to go, well, what does that mean? Well, what? And I'm sure that there in the African American community, there are many people who understand the symbology and the symbolism, but I'm sure there are many people who don't. And the deepening of their experience of that labyrinth walk, it would be interesting to record and acknowledge and see how it unfolds with people.
Well, your ideas are giving me some really good thoughts about how we can celebrate the refurbishing of the color by also coming up with these other materials. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. This is helpful for anyone contemplating creating a labyrinth in their community. You know what, the labyrinth to me is always the effects of the labyrinth are a pebble in the pond effect. It goes outward in increasing larger circles into infinity, and you just don't know how it's going to affect someone and when it's going to happen, and what kind of synchronicity is going to be in place at that moment that sets off all sorts of awakenings or awareness, and so my my gig with the Labyrinth Society and Communications is how do we communicate this? How do we express the uniqueness of this labyrinth that we has created, the uniqueness of this person who was an amazing individual, so accomplished, and despite all sorts of, you would say, obstacles, just kept going and was a powerhouse in her community. Really amazing. And for people who want to know more about it, just please go to the website, www.almetto.org/the-labyrinth. It gives, it's a beautiful website. It gives a background about Almetto, right?
Yes.
And Mrs. Alexander, and talks and a biography of hers, and it's just a wonderful. It's like, wow, who is this person? This is amazing, an amazing individual. So many commendations, so many awards, and she just was unstoppable. She was basically unstoppable.
Yeah.
Until her body wore out. I mean, she just kept going. It seemed like. And so
actually, they just had a proclamation day ceremony 2 weeks ago, and Almetto was honored again for her role as an educator. And we just posted some new photographs of people at that celebration, just kind of showing you the beautiful community that is still doing her work.
Mm-hmm. Well, she certainly has left a legacy.
That's true.
Can I ask? So, who can I ask? I'm gonna get down to the basics. Who footed the bill for this, and how much was this? How much was this whole project? The initial project. How much did it cost?
The initial project was around $40,000, including all the grading and preparation and everything. And Almetto came up with most of that herself. We did raise money on the sale of prints. I made some Gisele prints of 3 of the watercolor studies that I did in preparation for the Labyrinth. And we raised some money selling those.
So this was really her gift to the community.
Correct.
Wow.
Her gift to the community, and then and because of the partnership with the Y, then they're doing the maintenance, so we don't have to raise money for that. So,
and are they going to pay for the work that you need to do now and upgrading the color? And
yes, they have taken ownership of the physical aspect of the Labyrinth.
That's
wonderful. Which I'm. And the directors, past and current, are I think 3 of the 2 previous directors and 1 director are now on the board. So the partnership with the Y, I think, has been a growth experience for the people at the Y.
Yeah, you need to have a book. You need to have a book because what it's so it makes a difference for people to know what this Labyrinth has meant to them, and what it means to the community. And if other people see it, then they also get, this is a magical thing. This is life changing when you walk it. And it makes a difference, I think, to have that. And it is, you have to deal with, if it's outdoors, you have to deal with the weather element and the weather, and deal with those issues around having something that's available. So yeah, it's all something to think about and something to discuss and decide how you're going to approach it. But
well, is this one more instance where I need to say yes, ma'am?
Yeah. Thank you, and I'm not on her level at all. Not even close. But but I wanted to get into, you talked a little bit about the interpretation, the interpretive aspects of the Labyrinth. And besides her own, she had guidelines. And this is on the website, everybody. You can read them yourself. And it says, first, make beautiful things, for they are expressions of our acknowledgement and our gratitude. Then make these beautiful things unique. I'm going to get choked up here. The older I get, the more teary I get really easily. For each person, each moment, each circumstance is precious and sacred. So the third thing, if you encounter someone who's fallen into a hole of poverty or despair or pain, then get a ladder and help them out of that hole. We need so many ladders. And Almetto taught us that we are all of us walking the path. And persistence and patience and a God-filled heart, we will find ourselves centered. From that place.
That's what I said, representing the board at her funeral service.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And so explain the design elements because you mentioned pays homage to the nearly lost origins of the labyrinth and offers each individual the opportunity to metaphorically walk their life's journey along a pattern that echoes the journey and philosophy of Mrs. Alexander. So explain that. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, Almetto was of the mind through her own research and working with her son, her daughter, and her son-in-law, Robert, James, Harriet, and Robert. She believed that the labyrinth actually started in Egypt, which, if you start exploring a lot of, let's call it mythological history, then it's entirely likely that the labyrinth did start there. There's a story of Daedalus and Icarus, and supposedly Daedalus went to Egypt to see this labyrinth so that he could use that in designing the maze. So, and I've come to my personal conclusion that perhaps the labyrinth was the solution to the maze, and that Ariadne's thread was actually the past. Which is an interesting thing to think about, and it makes for some good paintings. I do a lot of spiderweb labyrinth paintings based on that idea. So when we started talking about the labyrinth beginning in Africa, which, especially in a Black community, that started resonating, but we also started thinking about the labyrinth as starting where all human life started. And I actually came up with this concept, and I used it when I was talking at one of the celebrations we had, that if you took Almetto's ladder and you held it upright in both of your hands, and you twisted it, and you twisted it, and you twisted again, then you would create the image of DNA, which is our common connection. So that was a nice little thought process that I came up with, but it just started making more and more sense that something as ancient and meaningful as the labyrinth would start where humanity started.
Well, as a symbol of our soul's journey, it certainly is quite possible. I don't know, Jeff Fayward would know this better than I. But there's Jody Lorimer has did a paper for the Labyrinth Society about Egyptian labyrinths, and that might be something that you might want to read. It should be on the TLS the website. And because anything that's written is available.
I'll investigate.
But it was an interesting workshop.
I'm sure.
In terms of considering a whole community or a whole city labyrinthine and have that just like Anyway, I'm not going to go off on that tangent, but so because the other thing that I wanted to ask is that if this labyrinth is speaking to the needs of the community, and it seems like it is, and the reason why I say this is because you said that it is continuing to being used. It's continuing to be used by both the Y and the church, and then do you think that this is an isolated instance, or do you think that this kind of community-based labyrinth can be duplicated elsewhere for especially for the African American community that is very much underrepresented among the labyrinth community, especially at our gatherings and stuff? You don't see a lot of African Americans in attendance. Right. And we would like to, and so this labyrinth speaks to the needs of that community and what they have gone through also in the past, in the design and the symbols. So I was wondering, how do you take that and use that other places for and interest other African Americans or people of color, um, in a general way? What would you suggest?
Oh, and in a general way.
Well, yeah, because there are lots of stories. I mean, African
Hmm.
Americans are, but the Hispanic community, and they all have, um, yeah, the indigenous
Um,
community, etc.
well, it takes the seed has to be planted.
Mm,
You don't go into a community and plant seeds on unfamiliar territory. I believe that someone in that community has to have the seed and find someone to help them bring that to fruition. So education is the key, which is what the society does.
mm,
I was invited into this particular community, which to this day, I operate out of that as just as an honor, and I try to acknowledge that honor, and I try to be of service as best I can.
mm,
I'll give you an example. I just recently did two labyrinths at a cancer center, and we shifted the sensibility a little bit to um, speak to the strength and survival possibilities of people with cancer. So I was brought into that community and asked to develop that language as well. So I don't know how to go out and find the community that needs this labyrinth. I guess we have to work under the assumption that virtually every community needs a labyrinth and figure out a way to make that happen.
mm. And was that the labyrinths? I was going to ask you if you have received other commissions or other job opportunities because of this installation or other labyrinth installations. So, it was that a specific type of labyrinth or design as well for the cancer hospital?
We did a 5 circuit labyrinth in a chapel anteroom because of the scale, and then we did an 11 circuit outside in a healing garden, working with the landscape architect. In this particular case, we used the symbolism of the dogwood blossom representing the strength of the dogwood tree to help acknowledge the strength required to battle cancer.
Mm, mm. Well, this is fascinating. Tony, there is someone on with us. Tony Robinson. I don't know if I think it's probably female. I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter because I am opening the Q&A session now. If you'd like to speak, you're welcome to ask Tom questions. You have to unmute yourself. And we can't, Tony, we can't hear you. I see that you're trying to, or the icon is microphone icon is going off and on, but we're not hearing you. Um, if you want to chat and type something in below, it says under webcam, it says chat, and if you want to write something there, it says type a message here, then I will ask Tom for you. That's up to you. But if not, we will continue. Um, Thank you for joining us, Tony, and I hope that this has helped in your labyrinth endeavors and projects as well. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to ask right now. Do you, Tom? Do you see yourself? So you talked about everybody needing labyrinths,
Mhm.
and yet the ones that you do are have a symbolism that that is specific to and I think that that's wonderful as a designer that you really um, create a design specific to the community that has asked you to uh, create this labyrinth for it, so that it speaks to the people who are walking,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the community itself. Um, and it's not just generic. It has something. The energy, the potency is increased because you also add symbolism that is specific to the community. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, or is that something that you're really called to doing all the time, or is it just?
Um, well, that's very much a part of my art practice and my practice as a person. Uh, Trying to be as respectful as possible, trying to listen. You use the word empathy, which is where the video is, which was an art project and business of mine for a number of years. Empathy Incorporated was based on a lot of philosophical reading that I did. Manuel Levinas, seeing God in the face of the other. These are things that are very important to me in my art practice. And so I like to make a labyrinth that honors the ancient symbolism and the survival, but just the ancient survival of that symbol. And by placing it in a unique setting in a community, I feel like the people who walk the labyrinth can access that ancient quality, but also have a certain permission to walk it in the language of contemporary times.
Hmm. So you're almost speaking here of the time folds that occur when you're working with this labyrinth energy, and that it past, present, and future is layered rather than linear.
Yeah, that it folds back on itself.
And these symbols that you incorporate in your labyrinth help that power, help that and therefore are picked up by human vibration, human energy as you walk it.
I would like to think so. And there's another aspect of making a labyrinth, especially when you're making that labyrinth on your knees. And I often, it gets really emotional because, especially after I finish the drawing of the labyrinth on the slab, and I walk it for the first time to make sure it's correct, and I start getting overwhelmed with all the stories that are associated with the people who will walk that labyrinth in the future, and it's an overwhelming experience quite often. So it's who's that big guy crawling around out there crying,
Wow. That's really interesting. That you actually pick up on it. It's almost a crystalline experience. But
yes.
if you've worked with crystals, they can, if they're old and they have old stories, transmit those stories to you if you're touching it. So it's sort of like that experience that you're privy to the vibrations that are inherent in the symbols and of the labyrinth itself, and the symbols that you add to it.
Yeah, and the possibility evoke.
Yeah.
Just in being symbols.
So I have to say, Tony Robinson. She said no questions, just just wanted to share that I live in Charlotte. Have walked all of Tom's labyrinths numerous times. Even met him at some point in the presence of his mom and brother, Billy. I have fingerprints on several new labyrinths in town, and I'm endeavoring to bring about a build of yet another in my husband's memory. So it's a lady. One lovely aspect of Charlotte is the relative abundance of labyrinths available to the public. am hoping to promote awareness of the fact across the greater Charlotte area. In addition to the worldwide Labyrinth locator, today loved hearing Tom's story about the symbolism and the effort to restore, as I find the colors quite faded and in need of refreshments. Blessings. And it's a she. Yes. Yes, Tony.
Yes.
So nice to know. So nice to know that it's a she or a he or whatever to delineate that. But and nowadays it can be quite, I don't want to step on anyone's toes. So thank you for sharing that. That is a wonderful story. And see, you just don't know, Tom, do you? Just don't know.
Oh no, you just have to try and be receptive, because you never know when you're gonna be called.
Yeah. And the symbolism, it's so easy to transport people with symbols. It's just easier. It's easier than talking. It's easier, people, we are symbol meaning making machines. And so I think that what you're doing and how you approach your design and construction of labyrinths and is wonderful for people to hear.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for sharing your labyrinth world today and your activities and your ministry, because it really, to me, what comes across to me is that this is a ministry for you. And while you might not be doing this 24/7, when you're asked to complete one or do one, and you say yes, and you sign the contract, it is a ministry. It is a way of being of service, an extension of what you already do, I think, in your life. So it's been a pleasure sharing this hour with you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's been great talking with you. Thank you so much for asking me.
So many continued blessings on your path, and you're welcome. And I can't wait to get down there. I'm moving in a couple of days to Florida. So South Carolina and North Carolina are much closer. And I will do my best. I've been to Asheville, I have not been to Charlottesville. I've been to Asheville and Greenville and the mountains in that area. And I know about the labyrinths there, but I will have to check it out. And this is on the Worldwide Labyrinth Locator. Her labyrinth, Mrs. Alexander's labyrinth.
Yes.
Okay, great. I did not check that, and I'm just checking with you, so that's great. And so thank you so much, and many blessings on your path, and keep in touch and keep us informed of what you're doing, and maybe come and talk to the gathering, become a workshop giver or keynote speaker or something at one of our gatherings, because I think what you're doing is unique and worthwhile, and I think people would really like to hear in a regular presentation. I'm going out on a limb here because I have no right to ask you. I'm not involved with the gathering committee other than helping to promote it. But it's, we need to know about these kind of unique situations, and it's funny that we don't know. It goes under the radar until someone, and I thank Lars Howlett for bringing this up to me. I asked him, I said, Lars, who else do you know? What other cool labyrinths? What do you know about? And he gave me a whole list, and I am so glad that we connected and that we had this time together. So thank you very much for attending.
Well, thank you. It's great visiting with you.
Yes. Well, you've been listening to the Labyrinth Society's Many Paths, Many Visions on GoToMeeting and broadcast by Spreaker with your host, Christiana Brinton. Be sure to check the TLS website media area, Facebook page, global group, and YouTube page for a list of upcoming dates and guests. Also, if this podcast has piqued your interest in the Labyrinth Society and you'd like more information about membership, please go to www.labyrinthsociety.org/membership. Many blessings, and may you find what you need on your path through life.